Hi, I am Kelly Cody, and welcome to week 3 of our 52-week baking challenge. Today we're going to be making a basic cookie, one of my favorites, chocolate chip. And one of the reasons that we're choosing this one for our basic cookie recipe is that you can actually play around with it and do a few different things. I'm going to be showing you the absolute most basic version of it, but we'll also be walking you through a few different things you can change up depending upon your personal preferences. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Our ingredients today are a half a cup of butter, softened, a half a cup of shortening, 1 cup of packed brown sugar, and it is important that it be packed, a half a cup of granulated sugar, a half a teaspoon of baking soda, 2 eggs, 1 teaspoon of vanilla, 2.5 cups of all-purpose flour, 12 ounces or 2 cups of chocolate, and 1.5 cups of chopped nuts, and the nuts, of course, are optional. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to be using my stand mixer today, just because I find it easier. The trick, though, on this is that you definitely do not want to over-mix your cookies. So whether you're using an electric mixer, a stand mixer, or by hand, do not over-mix your cookies. That will toughen them up. It'll it'll change the gluten structure of the flour, and it will end up making more of like a bready consistency as opposed to that soft cookies consistency that we're looking for. So let's go ahead and get started by putting our shortening and our butter into our mixing bowl. And this recipe uses both shortening and butter, and that's part of why I like this recipe, is that butter has a higher melting point, which means that, a lower melting point, which means that it'll burn faster. Shortening has the higher melting point, so it'll have a little bit more consistency. It'll give you a softer cookie, but the butter gives you that flavor that we like so much, right? And so I find that the combination of the two, half shortening and half butter, ends up getting me just the cookie that I'm looking for. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and turn our stand mixer on low. And it's going to, for about 30 seconds or so, we're gonna be mixing up this butter and this shortening. Now, as we talked last time when we were making our cake, the importance of having eggs at room temperature, the same holds true with butter, although not quite room temperature. I have some butter out here that I've actually been holding at room temperature to show, and I push on this, and I mean, like, it is just soft, right? So butter, the perfect amount of time for that out on the counter is about 15 minutes. So you want to take your butter out of the refrigerator about 15 minutes before you end up putting it into your cookie dough. That makes it soft enough to actually blend, but not too soft that it kind of like almost like liquefies out into your dough. All right, so my butter and my shortening look pretty well combined. Now I'm going to go ahead and put in my sugars. So I'm putting in the brown sugar. And brown sugar is great for that extra flavor. It adds a depth of flavor to it that you don't get from just regular sugar alone. So regular sugar, because you'll find some recipes, have just regular plain old white sugar. And then we're going to put in the baking soda. And make sure we get all of that. There's only a half a teaspoon. We want all of it in there. Okay. And we're going to let that go for just a little bit. Again, we don't want to overmix it, but I can see looking into there that some of the butter pieces aren't incorporating fully. So I'm actually going to turn my mixer off, lower it down, and I'm going to scrape just to make sure, because I see some globs of butter in there. That is one of the ways that you can end up with really inconsistent cookies where some of them seem to be perfectly fine out of the oven. Oh my gosh, speaking of the oven, we need to preheat our oven, right? So let's go ahead, and I'm just double checking. Yes, preheating the oven to 375 degrees. So 375 degrees, perfect. As I was saying, that's a way that you can get a really inconsistent cookie, is if things aren't mixed properly. So if you've got globs of butter or globs of flour for either being overmixed, undermixed, whatever it ends up being. All right, we're going to put this back up and turn the mixer back on. I'm going to put it at a level 3 this time, just so I can get that butter blended into my sugars. Okay. All right, yeah, that's doing the trick. So that's what I was hoping for. So the next we're going to be adding in our 2 eggs, and we're going to add them, we can add them at the same time. So last week when we did cake, we added them one at a time to make sure that they really got incorporated into the flour. Not so big of a deal today. So let me go ahead and just put in my eggs. All right, we've got our 2 eggs, and now we're going to put in the rest of our liquid ingredients, which is just the vanilla. Now, one thing that I like to do is get all of my ingredients out beforehand. And I'm going to actually scrape the bowl down again because it's getting, you can see this is a fast recipe. It comes together quickly. I like to get all of my ingredients out beforehand, measure everything beforehand, put them in bowls just to keep it so that when I'm moving in here and we're going through things quickly, I don't have to worry about stopping and measuring as I go along. And a smaller kitchen, it also lets me clean up as I go. So I just, again, kind of keeps everything neat and tidy. All right, I'm going to be putting in regular unbleached flour in here. However, this is where you can have a little bit of your personal taste can dictate. Now, of course, if you're gluten-free, you can use almond flour. You're going to get a slightly different consistency than for those of us using regular unbleached flour, but it's still perfectly wonderful chocolate chip cookie. So you can do full almond flour if you like. Another option, if there's anybody out there who likes a chewier cookie, right? So you really like the chewiness, you can actually put in either 100% bread flour instead of the unbleached, or you can do a 50-50 blend. And maybe play around with that on your own and see what you end up personally liking. Take out first a half of the, so I ended up using, it was 2.5 cups of flour. Again, I've talked in the past though about how I like measuring, weighing instead of measuring. So that's 325 grams of flour. And so you can take out maybe 150 of those grams and swap them with bread flour instead. And see how you like that. And if you enjoy that, maybe up the bread flour ratio to regular unbleached flour a little bit more. All right, so we're going to start putting in our flour, and we are putting it in at a low speed on the mixer, and we're going to put it in until the mixer looks like it's just working too hard, and then we're going to put in the rest by hand. So let me go ahead and start. All right, it's on the lowest speed I can possibly get it, and I'm just going to start putting in a little bit of flour at a time. Now, my stand mixer is pretty heavy duty, so it's not going to have a problem with the amount of flour that I'm putting in. But if yours does, absolutely don't make your stand mixer work hard. So you can go ahead and stop it at any time, and then just go back to hand putting in everything. We're going to be doing putting in by hand our chocolate and nuts anyway, so it's not like you're missing a step. All right, and again, we don't want to over mix this, so I'm going to stop it right there and take out my paddle here. All right, and we're going to just push the mixer out of the way for now. All right, I'm super excited, by the way. I last night ordered an ice cream maker from a friend who's doing a Pampered Chef party. And I cannot wait to make my very own chocolate chip cookie dough ice cream. That'll be a fun treat for me. All right, so let's put that in the sink. All right, so now I'm just, again, grabbing the sides, picking up any extra that's in there. And okay, good. So I am happy with that consistency. And now the next step is to put in the chocolate. Now you can absolutely chop your chocolate if you like to have it spread out kind of more throughout the cookie and be more gooey. I'm not. Part of it's just laziness, and part of it's these chocolate chips are great. I like the size of them. They're not those giant chocolate chips that you can sometimes find in stores. Another option, if you've got kids, instead of using chocolate chips, put in M&Ms. Those are kind of fun. I guess not just children, adults like them too. All right, and I am having to work for this, that's for sure. Now, you absolutely could stop here. However, I like nuts in my cookies, and so I'm going to be putting in walnuts. And so let's go ahead and get the walnuts in there, and same thing, we're going to be stirring these in by hand. Now, the chocolate that I chose, because it's such a strong flavor, and it's obviously, it's a big part of the cookie, make sure that it's a chocolate that you really like, and don't feel like you shouldn't splurge a little bit on it. I bought Guittard chocolate. I've used Ghirardelli before. For Christmas, my mom bought me some Valrhona chocolate, and that is like as in my opinion, as good as chocolate can get. That is special in my world, at least. That is special occasion chocolate. That is not chocolate chip cookie chocolate. That'll probably be used on a chocolate ganache cake, or I don't know. I've got to really plan that one out of how to use that. All right. So, all right, I am happy. Oh, and my arm is not happy, but I am happy with how everything has come together in there. So the next step is we're going to go ahead and take out our baking sheets. You want to make sure that you have a regular baking sheet. Do not grease it. If you put grease on your baking sheet, butter or spray, it'll actually make your cookies spread out more, and it'll make them crunchy for sure. Although I guess if you like crunchy cookies, you can do that. But it can also make them burn a little faster because they're getting a little thinner. So we're gonna go ahead, we're gonna grab our baking sheet and we'll get on to the next step. Alrighty. All right, so we've got our baking sheet. Now I'm going to put parchment paper on mine. I've just found that I like cooking with parchment paper. First off, it makes just an easier cleanup. Nothing's stuck onto the baking sheet, although it shouldn't happen anyway, but sometimes it does. And they just seem to come out a little bit better for me than when I use my plain baking sheets. So the next thing is I've got a scooper here. You can certainly use spoons if you can use a scooper, whatever works for you. The whole point of it, though, is to get the cookies as similarly in size each time. You may have seen like baking challenge shows on TV, Great British Bake Off, whatnot, where they will sometimes even weigh out because they're going to be judged on them. I am certainly not that particular when it comes to making my own cookies at home. But we're going to just go ahead and use my scooper, and we're going to go ahead and fill up the entire sheet this way. And then once I'm finished, depending upon, again, your own preferences, you can push them down with the back of a spoon, a spatula, the bottom of a cup, or you can leave them kind of mounded the way that they are now. You'll just get a slightly different shape at the end, but whatever you prefer is what you're going to do for what you want. So we're going to go ahead and do these. Another thing is cookies. They bake for a very short amount of time, at least these cookies do. And so when we put them into the oven, you might have heard some people recommend to open up your oven door halfway through and rotate the cookies so that they get an even bake around. The problem is that that lets out so much of the heat within the oven, and they're in there for, again, just like 8 to 10 minutes. It's not a long time, that it doesn't have enough time to really heat back up again. And so you're disrupting the baking process. So my personal recommendation is, unless you've got a really, really uneven oven, just leave them in there the full time. So I'm just going to kind of make mine a little tidier just so that I don't end up with like wonky spider looking cookies. Some of these came out a little funky. All right, just tidying them up. Okay, and we're going to pop these into the oven. Now, as I said, 8 to 10 minutes is what we're looking for. So let's put them in. And I'm just putting them in the middle of the oven. So 8 to 10 minutes. 8 minutes if you are looking for more of a softer, chewy cookie, which is what I am doing. I like the softer, more tender cookies. 10 minutes if you like a more crispy cookie. And go ahead and get your cooling racks out and ready. And while those are in the oven, I'm going to go ahead and prep my second sheet of cookies. And I will see you when these cookies are ready to come out of the oven. All right, we have got about 2 minutes left before our cookies come out of the oven. So I want to talk about a few different variations. Now, we already talked about being able to use different kinds of flour in these cookies to get different effects. Another thing, we're actually making cookies right now, right? I mean, basic cookies. Oh, and by the way, I should have said this recipe technically makes 60 cookies. We're going to actually be making about 30. I like slightly larger cookies. So you can make super small ones on this, but you can also turn this exact same recipe with no modifications into cookie bars. So you can take a 12 by 15 pan and push all of the dough into the pan. If you're going to do that, I highly recommend lining your pan though with parchment paper. If not, you're going to have a bit of a difficult time getting the bars out of the pan. So you can make regular cookies. You can do cookie bars on this one, maybe drizzle them with some chocolate on the top, or put a very, very thin layer of melted chocolate on top if you like that. And who doesn't like melted chocolate? And then letting it harden. You can also take out, so we use semi-sweet chocolate in this, but you can take that out and you can substitute that with dark chocolate, or you can substitute it with white chocolate and then put in, instead of walnuts, do macadamia nuts. So again, exact same cookie recipe, but would give you a white chocolate macadamia nut cookie instead of a chocolate chip walnut cookie, if that's something that also interests you. So you've got a few different options here, and we are down to about 20 seconds. So I'm going to get my pot holders out and ready. And I also have my cooling rack here. So I am very impatiently waiting for these. Another thing, if you are going to be doing multiple sheets the way that I am doing, make sure that you're not putting cookie dough onto a hot sheet that's just out of the oven. And there we go. Let's take them out. And oh yes, those are nice and gooey looking. I like that. So here are what our cookies look like. I am very happy. So you can see there's just a little bit of coloring around the edge on these. They didn't squidge all out over the place, which they could do if we had greased the sheet or used 100% butter on these. So I'll be honest, very, very happy with how these cookies turned out. So I'm gonna set them over here. I'm gonna get my next sheet in. And as I was just saying, you never want to put cookie dough onto a hot baking sheet. So if you don't have more than one baking sheet, then you're going to want to make sure that you give yourself plenty of time for the baking sheet to cool off in between bakings. All right, so let me get my spatula. And the wire rack that I'm using, you'll see it has lines across it. Technically, if you have one, you're going to want to use a cooling rack that has grid lines. They're a lot closer together. This certainly will do the trick, but I might end up with cookies that are kind of like, as it's cooling, it'll soften around the lines a little bit. The cookie tastes the same, but if you're looking for presentation wise, you'll end up with a slightly better looking final product if you have a grid cooling rack. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get the rest of these cookies off of my baking sheet and cooling on the cooling rack. And I also have another tray of cookies, so I'm going to go ahead and get that into the oven as well. And that is about it. We'll come back for a real quick look at the end just to taste our cookies and see how they did. So I'll see you in a bit. All right, we are back. The final test of a cookie, right, is how does it taste? So let's take a bite. It's still warm from the oven and the chocolate is all gooey, and it makes me very happy. Yeah, I like the crunch of the walnuts in there. It's really good. And I'm a purist, so milk and cookies goes well. I also want to talk about storing these now. I'll be taking these into work so my coworkers get to enjoy them, and then I don't have to worry about them being in my house and being consumed by me in 24 hours. You can absolutely put these into an airtight container and freeze them for up to 3 months. Another trick you can do is actually make the cookie dough, bake maybe one sheet of them, put the rest of the cookie dough completely, close it in saran wrap, and then put it in a Ziploc bag and put that in the freezer. Actually freeze your dough. And then whenever you're in the mood to make some cookies, you can take the dough out, cut off a piece of it because it'll be frozen hard. So you can cut off a piece of it, let that come to not quite room temperature, but enough that you can actually, it's malleable and you can do it. And then you can have fresh baked cookies whenever you want without the hassle of having to clean up all of your bowls and utensils. Anyway, so enjoy, happy baking, and I will see you here next week where we are going to be doing a quick rising instant bread. See you and have a great day.